I am Elijah, and this is my story. The smoke was still rising when I fell to my knees on Mount Carmel, and I could not tell any more if the roaring in my ears was the fire or my own blood. Fire, real fire, falling from a clean sky, no clouds, no storm, just the naked hand of the God of Israel reaching down and consuming a soaked altar of stone and wood and water-drenched wood until nothing remained but ash and steam and 450 prophets of Baal standing in stunned, sweating silence. I had built that altar myself. 12 stones for 12 tribes, my hands raw from hauling them, my knees bruised from kneeling in the trench I dug around it. I had ordered the water poured, once, twice, a third time, until the wood was soaked and the trench ran like a small river, because I wanted no man on that mountain to say the fire had a natural cause. I wanted no room left for doubt. And when I lifted my face to heaven and prayed, not shouted, not screamed the way the prophets of Baal had done all morning, cutting themselves with swords and lances until their blood ran down onto the ground, I simply asked, "Let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant." And the fire fell. The people who had stood watching all day with folded arms and doubtful faces were now on their faces in the dirt, crying out, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" I remember the sound of it rolling across the mountain like thunder rolling backward, and for one radiant moment I felt something I had not felt in 3 long years of drought and hiding and hunger. I felt like a man standing exactly where God had made him to stand. Then came the killing of the prophets, down at the brook Kishon, my own hands part of the justice that day, because false prophets who had led a nation into idolatry and away from the living God could not simply be allowed to walk back to their temples. It was the law of Moses being carried out. It was right. And yet, even as I did it, something in me, some tender human place, recoiled at blood, at bodies, at the sheer scale of it. I did not let myself feel it then. There wasn't time. Ahab was still watching from the hillside, and the sky, I knew, was about to break. I told him so myself. "Go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of abundance of rain." And I climbed to the top of Carmel and folded myself down low, forehead nearly to my knees, and I prayed again. Not a triumphant prayer this time, but a quiet, insistent one, the kind a man prays when he has seen God move once and dares to ask him to move again. 7 times I sent my servant to look toward the sea. 6 times, nothing. The 7th time he came back and said, "There is a cloud, as small as a man's hand, rising from the sea." A hand-sized cloud. That was enough for me. I had learned, over hard years, that God rarely announces His mercy with fanfare. Usually it comes small, easy to miss, and grows only once you've believed it's really there. I tucked my cloak into my belt and I ran. I ran the whole 16 miles ahead of Ahab's chariot, the sky turning black above me, the wind rising, the first fat drops of rain, the first rain Israel had seen in 3 years, striking my shoulders like a blessing flung from heaven. I remember laughing. I remember weeping. I remember thinking, foolishly, gloriously, that surely now everything would change. Surely Ahab would repent. Surely Jezebel, seeing what her prophets could not do, would finally see the truth too. I did not yet understand how deep the roots of hatred can run, even in the face of undeniable power. The messenger found me before I had even changed out of my rain-soaked clothes. He didn't need to say much. Jezebel had heard everything: the fire, the water, the 450 dead prophets of her God. And her answer arrived in my ears like a blade sliding between my ribs. So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. I want to tell you I stood firm. I want to tell you that the man who had stood alone against an entire nation of idolaters, who had called down fire from heaven with nothing but a prayer, simply lifted his chin and trusted God the way he had trusted him on the mountain. But that is not what happened. I ran. I do not fully understand it myself, even now, looking back across the years. I had stared down 450 prophets without a tremor in my hand. I had told a king to his face that judgment was coming. And yet, one woman's threat, one voice, no army marching, no soldiers at my door, only words, undid me completely. Fear does not always wait for a reason that makes sense. Sometimes it simply arrives, and the body obeys it before the mind can argue. I left my servant in Beersheba, in the far south of Judah, the last town before nothing but wilderness, and I kept walking, alone now, truly alone, the way I had not been even in my loneliest years as a prophet, because always before I had known I was walking toward something, toward Ahab, toward Carmel, toward a purpose God had set in front of me like a lit torch in the dark. Now I was only walking away. The wilderness south of Beersheba does not forgive a man for long. The ground turns from scrubland to naked rock and sand within a day's journey, the heat pressing down at noon like a hand on the back of the neck, the nights turning cold enough to ache in the joints. I had no food. I had left it behind, along with everything else, along with, I realized somewhere in that second day of walking, the will to keep living at all. I found a lone juniper tree, or broom tree, its thin gray-green branches offering the only shade for what felt like miles, and I sat down beneath it, and something in me simply broke. "It is enough," I said it out loud, to the empty wilderness, to whatever God might still be listening after I had run so far from where he'd placed me. "Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." I meant it. I want you to understand that I meant it completely. This was not poetry. This was not a dramatic prophet's flourish. This was a man who had given everything, his years, his safety, his reputation, his whole life poured out like the water on that altar, and who now, in the aftermath of the greatest victory God had ever given him, felt utterly, catastrophically empty. Elated one day, hunted the next, and beneath both feelings, a bone-deep exhaustion, I had been outrunning for 3 long years of drought and confrontation, and hiding in caves and by hidden brooks, never once stopping to simply be a man who eats and sleeps and rests. Victory, I learned that day, does not always heal what fear and weariness have worn thin. Sometimes the greatest spiritual highs leave us more exposed to the valleys that follow, not less, because we have spent every reserve we had getting to the mountaintop, and there is nothing left in the storehouse when the mountain gives way to wilderness. I lay down under that juniper tree, and I slept, the sleep of a man who has stopped fighting. And God did not rebuke me. That is the part I return to again and again, all these years later. I woke to a touch on my shoulder, not rough, not urgent, a hand simply resting there, and I opened my eyes expecting, I think, a vision, a voice of thunder, some grand confrontation about my failure of nerve. Instead, there was an angel, and beside my head, a cake baked on hot coals and a jar of water. "Arise and eat," the angel said. "No lecture, no why did you run, Elijah, after everything I showed you on Carmel. No reminder of the fire, the rain, the 450, just bread and water and permission to eat it. I ate and I drank, and because the body's exhaustion so often masquerades as the soul's despair, and because God, who made this body, knows the difference even when we don't, I lay back down and slept again. The angel returned a second time, touched me again. Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you. I have thought of that sentence more than almost any other in my life. The journey is too great for you, not a rebuke, an acknowledgement. God was not scolding me for weakness. He was naming the truth of my limits and meeting me in them. He fed me before he questioned me. He let my body rest before he touched my soul. I have known men since who believe God deals first in words, in commands, in explanations, and only later, if ever, in bread. I did not find him to be such a God. I found him to be the kind who feeds a despairing man twice before he asks him a single question. Strengthened by that food, I walked 40 days and 40 nights, all the way to Horeb, the mountain of God, the same mountain, I would learn later, where Moses himself had stood in the cleft of the rock. I found a cave there and spent the night in it, and it was there that the word of the Lord finally came to me in the form of a question I could not escape. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" I told him everything, the zeal I'd had for him, the covenant Israel had broken, the altars torn down, the prophets killed, and how I alone was left. And now they sought my life too. It poured out of me like the water I'd poured on that altar, all of it, the fear and the grief and the terrible isolating sense that I had given my whole life to a cause that was collapsing anyway, that I was the last faithful man standing in a nation determined to forget God entirely. He told me to go out and stand on the mountain, for the Lord was about to pass by. And a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still, small voice. I had watched fire fall from heaven on Carmel. I had run from a queen's threat into the desert to die. And here, at the end of it all, God did not come to me in the spectacular. He came in a whisper, gentle enough that I had to wrap my face in my mantle and step to the mouth of the cave just to be near it. I think I finally understood, standing there, that the God who thunders is the same God who whispers, and that he is not more present in the earthquake than in the quiet, only more obvious. It takes a broken man in a wilderness to learn to listen for the quiet kind. He asked me again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And I gave him the same answer, because my heart had not fully caught up yet to what my body already knew, that I had been fed and rested and heard. But then he did something I had not expected. He did not simply comfort me and send me back to my cave. He gave me work. Anoint Hazael king over Syria. Anoint Jehu king over Israel. Anoint Elisha to take your place as prophet. And he told me something that undid the deepest lie fear had whispered to me under that juniper tree. The lie that I was alone, the last one, the only faithful man left in a faithless nation. Yet I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal. 7,000. I had wept under a broom tree, convinced I was utterly alone. And all the while, God had 7,000 faithful hearts hidden across the land that I could not see, because grief and fear had narrowed my vision down to nothing but myself and my exhaustion. I left that cave a different man than the one who had entered it. Not because my circumstances had changed. Jezebel still hated me. Ahab's kingdom was still crooked. The work ahead was still enormous. But because I had learned in the deepest valley of my life that God does not despise his servants for breaking. He feeds the despairing. He lets the exhausted sleep before he speaks to them. He meets zeal that has curdled into fear, not with anger, but with bread and rest and a whisper and a purpose to walk back into. I found Elisha not long after, plowing a field with 12 yoke of oxen, and I threw my mantle over him, and something in me recognized, watching him leave his father's plow to follow, that God's work does not end when one man reaches the end of his strength. It simply continues, sometimes through the very hands we are being prepared to hand it to. If you are worn thin tonight, if you have won a victory and still feel strangely empty, if fear has chased you further than you ever thought it could, if you have said in your heart, "It is enough," and meant it, hear this from a man who has been exactly there, under that tree, wanting only to stop. God does not condemn you for your exhaustion. He feeds you in it. He lets you rest in it. And when you are ready, he will meet you, not always in the wind, not always in the fire, but often in the quiet, with a question and a purpose, and the truth that you were never as alone as the wilderness made you feel. If you have been blessed by this story, subscribe, like, and share it with a friend.